About 10 years ago, one of my best friends was killed. We aren't sure how he died. Someone took great care in disposing the body, so we presume there was foul play involved. He had a rougher background than I did, and some of that apparently caught up to him. And in fact, when I look back, he forced his way into my life, almost literally. He would show up where I worked and just sit down next to me with a big doofy grin on his face, and in no uncertain terms tell me he wanted to do whatever I was doing. And I dodged him for weeks, months even. I literally would hide when I saw him. He just seemed unhinged, and I couldn't imagine we had anything to learn from each other or in common with each other. It just seemed like a problem waiting to happen. And one day I finally said, you know what I really want to do? What I want to do, you have no interest in doing. And he said, what's that? And I actually, at the time, I didn't even know what I wanted to do, but I just blurted out, I want to go home, get a six-pack of beer, sit on the floor and play chess. And I thought that would be just dorky enough to dissuade this person. And he said it sounded like a great idea. He'd buy the beer. And I was surprised, and so I took him up on it. And it turns out he was a very good chess player. It turns out he learned it in prison, but regardless, you work with what you got, and we gradually got to know each other. And he became very close. And a handful of years later, he was gone. I don't bring this up to bum anybody out. I bring it up actually to, well, I guess to give credit where it's due. Because at some point, he had gotten a book for me. Thought there was something I should read. And he said it would change my life. And what that book was, Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper. He was right. It didn't take long, actually. One read, and I was floored. And so, really, the reason I'm even here right now, chasing the threads of that trail, still, that started with him. And it taught me that you just never know why someone could be in your life or what the results of it may be. But sometimes you gotta take chances, because you never know. And I'm talking about this because in that book, William Cooper publishes a letter, or excerpts from it. It's a letter that was found in an IBM printer. I'm pretty certain many of you will be familiar with it. It's not a secret. It's not breaking news I'm bringing you. It's called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. It's been around since. It was dated in 1979. It was found about 7 years later, on July 7th, in an IBM copier that was purchased at like a surplus sale. And when William Cooper published it, it didn't have all these drawings in it. It didn't have these illustrations, these math equations. But later on in life, it was released again. I believe it's common. It's a Creative Commons. I don't believe anyone has any copyright claim on it. I think it's anonymous. But the idea is that the document's been reportedly verified as authentic, authenticated by different technical writers from military intelligence and federal employees. And I didn't steal it. It doesn't belong to the government. It doesn't endanger national security. It's actually the opposite. It's kind of morally, but you feel morally bound to put it out there. It's a plan. And it said, essentially it's a declaration of war against the American people. An employee of Boeing purchased an IBM copier for scrap parts and found it inside. And it was written in the days of the Cold War, and it's a policy that was adopted by the international elites at the first Bilderberg meeting in 1954. And to me, it's a very harrowing and depressing strategy, and I believe it to be authentic. I will let you listen, if you're inclined, and trust your heart on it. And whether or not it's authentic, I'm not sure if it matters, but we're always fumbling around trying to figure out some version of the plan that these machinations that seem to be aimed at us. And if you haven't read this, or maybe it's been a while, maybe through fresh ears or a different voice, maybe it will strike a chord in you, and you may realize what we're up against, what point we're at chronologically in this plan, and what it's going to take to succeed. And they map it all out. It's only about 30 pages, but I'm not going to read the entire thing. I'm just going to read some excerpts, the parts that I find that resonate with the current timeline. I will probably read 80% of it. I'll leave out some of the things that require the visual cues, some of the math equations. And this is an audio project, so the slideshow is just thematic for this visual platform. But really, you can ignore the slideshow if you'd like. I don't. That's not the main point. These expressed opinions and thoughts are not my own. If I appear to be addressing people in a condescending way, it's the words of the document that I'm reading. With that being said, I can continue the trend, passing on the gift and the curse of knowledge that was delivered to me all those years ago. And this is in honor of that friendship and that gift. And it begins now. Welcome aboard. This publication marks the 25th anniversary of the Third World War, called the Quiet War, being conducted using subjective biological warfare, fought with Silent Weapons. This contains an introductory description of this war, its strategies, and its weaponry. The given date is May 1979. It is patently impossible to discuss social engineering, or the automation of a society, i.e. the engineering of social automation systems, on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and the destruction of human life. In other words, slavery and genocide. This manual is in itself an analog declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny. Otherwise, it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, whenever any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodologies for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or group of persons against the public. The solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid, with no agonizing over religious, moral, or culture values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity, and yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without the loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest, and I would advise do not deviate from that. Silent weapon technology has evolved from operations research, which is a strategic and tactical methodology developed under the military management in England during World War II. The original purpose of operations research was to study the strategic and tactical problems of air and land defense, with the objective of effective use of limited military resources against foreign enemies. Logistics. Now, it was soon recognized by those in positions of power that these same methods might be used for totally controlling a society, but better tools were necessary. Social engineering, which we define as the analysis and automation of a society, it requires the correlation of great amounts of constantly changing economic information, or data. So, a high-speed computerized data processing system is necessary, which could race ahead of the society and predict when society would arrive for capitulation. Relay computers were too slow, but the electronic computer invented in 1946 filled the bill. Now, the next breakthrough was the development of the simplex method of linear programming in 1947 by the mathematician George B. Danzig. And then in 1948, the transistor invented, which promised expansion of the computer field, reducing space and power requirements. With these three inventions under their direction, those in positions of power began to strongly suspect that it was possible for them to control the whole world with the push of a button. And so immediately the Glock Propeller Foundation got in on the ground floor, made a 4-year grant to Harvard College, funding the Harvard Economic Research Project for the study of the structure of the American economy. And 1 year later, 1949, the United States Air Force joined in. In 1952, the grant period terminated, and a high-level meeting of the elite was held to determine the next phase of social operations research. The Harvard Project had been very fruitful, as is borne out by the publication of its results in 1953, which suggests the feasibility of common social engineering. So engineered in the last half the decade of the 1940s, the new quiet war machine stood in sparkling gold-plated hardware on the showroom floor by 1954. The promise of unlocking unlimited sources of fusion atomic energy from the hydrogen in seawater and the consequent availability of unlimited social power, this possibility was only decades away. So the Quiet War was quietly declared by the international elite at a meeting held in 1954. And although that silent weapon system was nearly exposed 13 years later, the evolution of the new weapon system has never suffered any major setbacks. In 1954, it was well recognized by those in position of authority that it was only a matter of time, only a few decades, before the general public, you and I, would be able to grasp and upset the cradle of power. For the very elements of the new silent weapon technology were inaccessible for public utopia. So the issue of primary concern, that of dominance, revolves around the subject of the energy sciences. Energy is recognized as the key to all activity on Earth. Natural science is the study of the sources and the control of natural energy, and social science, which is expressed as economics, is the study of the sources and control of social energy. Both are bookkeeping systems, just mathematics. So therefore, mathematics is the primary energy science, and the bookkeeper can be king if the public can be kept ignorant of the methodology of the bookkeeping. All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge, the end is control. I'll say that again. All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge. The end is control. Beyond this remains only one issue: who will be the beneficiary. In 1954, this was the issue of primary concern. Now, although the so-called moral issues were raised, in view of the law of natural selection, it was agreed that a nation or world of people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice, by consent. So consequently, in the interest of future world order and future world peace and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a war, a quiet war against the American public, with the ultimate objective of permanently shifting the natural and social energy, i.e. wealth, of the undisciplined and the irresponsible many into the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible, and worthy few. And in order to implement this objective, it was necessary to create, to secure, and apply new weapons, which, as it turned out, were a class of weapons that were so subtle and sophisticated that they earned the name silent weapons. In conclusion, the objective of economic research, as conducted by the magnates of capital banking and the industries of commodity and services, is the establishment of an economy which is totally predictable and therefore manipulatable. In order to achieve a totally predictable economy, the low-class elements of society must be brought under total control. They must be housebroken, trained, assigned a yoke, and a long-term social duty from a very early age, before they have an opportunity to question the propriety of the matter. And in order to achieve such conformity, the lower-class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government-separated daycare centers for the occupationally orphaned children. The quality of the education given to the lower class must be of the poorest sort. This mode of ignorance, which isolates the inferior class from the superior class, is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower-class individuals have little, if any, hope of extracting themselves from their assigned lot in life. This form of slavery is essential to maintain some measure of social order and peace and tranquility for the ruling upper class. So, descriptive introduction of this silent weapon. Everything that is expected from an ordinary weapon is expected from a silent weapon by its creators, but in a manner of its own function. It shoots situations instead of bullets, propelled by data processors instead of chemical reaction, instead of explosion, and originates from bits of data instead of grams of gunpowder, instead of grains of gunpowder from a computer, instead of a gun operated by a computer programmer, instead of a marksman under the orders of a banking magnate. It shoots situations instead of bullets, propelled by a data processor instead of an explosion, originating from hints of data instead of grains of gunpowder, from a computer instead of a gun, from a computer programmer instead of a marksman, under the orders of a banking magnate. It makes no obvious explosive noise, it causes no obvious physical or mental injuries, and does not obviously interfere with anyone's daily social life. Yet it does make an unmistakable noise. It does cause unmistakable physical and mental damage, and it unmistakably interferes with the daily social life. Unmistakable to a trained observer, one who knows what to look for. The public can't comprehend this weapon, and therefore they can't believe that they are being attacked and subdued by it. People might instinctively feel something's wrong, but that silent weapon is applied gradually. The public adjusts or adapts to its presence, and it learns to tolerate its encroachment on their lives until the pressure, psychological, via the economy becomes too great and they crack up. So therefore the silent weapon is a type of technology is now growth of a simple idea discovered, expressed, and applied by the quoted Mr. Sayer, Clamshell, Clothbiled. Mr. Brothbile discovered the missing passive component of economic theory known as economic inductance. Now, I, of course, didn't think of it in 20th century terms, and mathematical analysis had to wait for the Second Industrial Revolution and the rise of the theory of mechanics and electronics, and finally the invention of the electronic computer, all before it could effectively be applied in the control of the world economy. He, of course, did not think of his discovery in these 20th century terms. Mathematical analysis had to wait for the Second Industrial Revolution, had to wait for the rise of the theory of mechanics, and the study of one energy system, whether it's mechanics, electronics, can be immediately applied in the study of any other energy system, such as economics. So Mr. Blothblild discovered was the basic principle of power, influence, and control of other people, as applied to economics. And that principle is, when you assume the appearance of power, people will soon give it to you. He discovered the currency, or deposit loan accounts, had the required appearance of power that could then be used to induce people, inductance, with people, corresponding to a magnetic field, into surrendering their real wealth in exchange for the promise of greater wealth, instead of actual compensation. They would put up real collateral the general public would put up real collateral in exchange for a loan of promissory note. Mr. Gothmild found that he could issue more notes than he had backing for, so long as he had someone's stack of gold as a persuader to show his customers. So he loaned his promissory notes to individuals and to governments, and this would create overconfidence, and then he would make money scarce, tighten control of the system, and then collect the collateral through the obligation of the contracts. The cycle was then repeated, and these pressures could be used to ignite a war. And then he would control the availability of currency, and he would determine who would win the war. And that government which agreed to give him control of the economic system would be the government that got his support. Collection of debts is guaranteed by economic aid to the enemy of the debtor. The profit made from this economic methodology made Mr. Gothmild all the more able to expand his wealth. He found that public greed would allow currency to be printed by government order beyond the limits of backing in precious metal or the production, say, of goods and services. So in this structure, credit as a pure element called currency has the appearance of capital, but is in effect negative capital. It is the appearance of service, but it is in fact debt. It is an economic inductance instead of an economic capacitance, and if balanced in no other way, it will have to be balanced by the negation of population through war or genocide. The total goods and services represent real capital. So since energy is the key to all the activity on the face of the earth, it follows that in order to maintain a monopoly of energy, and raw materials, and goods, and services, in order to establish a world system of slave labor, it's necessary to have a first strike capability in the field of economics. In order to maintain our position, it's necessary that we have absolute first knowledge of the science of control over all economic factors and the first experience at engineering the world economy. So in order to achieve such sovereignty, we have to at least achieve this one end, that the public will not make either the logical nor the mathematical connection between economics and the other energy sciences, or learn how to apply such knowledge. To the public will largely depend on how effective we've been at controlling the media, subverting education, and keeping the public distracted with matters of no real importance. The Harvard Economic Research Project was an extension of World War II research. Its purpose was to discover the science of controlling an economy. At first, the American economy, and then the world economy. And it was felt that with sufficient mathematical foundation and data, it would be nearly as easy to predict and control the trend of an economy as to predict and control the trajectory of a projectile. And such has proven to be the case. Moreover, the economy has been transformed into a guided missile on target. The immediate aim of the Harvard Project was to discover the economic structure, what forces change that structure, how the behavior of the structure can be predicted, and how it can be manipulated. What was needed was a well-organized knowledge of the mathematical structures and interrelationships of investment, of production, of distribution, of consumption. So, to make a short story of it all, it was discovered that an economy obeyed the same laws as electricity, and that all the mathematical theory and practical and computer know-how developed for the electronic field could be directly applied in the study of economics. This discovery was not openly declared, and its more subtle implications were, and are, kept a closely guarded secret. For example, the impulse of firing a gun mounted on the frame causes shock waves, which tell engineers the conditions under which some parts of the plane or its wings will start to vibrate or flutter or disintegrate. And economic engineers do the same result in studying the behavior of the economy by carefully selecting a staple commodity, such as beef, coffee, gasoline, sugar, and then causing a sudden change or shock in its price or availability, and then kicking everybody's budget and staying holds out of shape. They then observe the shock waves which result by monitoring the changes in advertising, in prices, in sales. So the type of personal input that should be gathered, and where from. General sources of information would include telephone taps, analysis of garbage, surveillance, behavior of children in school. We can learn the standard of living by food, shelter, clothing, transportation. We can learn their social contacts from the telephone, itemized records of calls, from the marriage certificates and birth certificates, from memberships in organizations, political affiliation. And then there's the personal paper trail, personal buying habits, checking accounts, credit card purchases, anything bearing the UPC, assets and checking accounts, saving accounts, and real estate and business and automobile and safety deposit boxes and stock markets. And then government sources, welfare, Social Security, USDA surplus food, stuff like that. We also would like to learn from OSHA, Census, the IRS, surveillance of mail, We need to know strengths and weaknesses. We need their activities, the legal crime record, hospital records, psychiatric records, suggestibility or hypnosis, pain, pleasure, love, methods of coping, alcohol, drugs, entertainment, religious factors that may influence their behavior, other methods they use to escape from reality. Do they payment on time? Do they pay their phone bills, energy purchases, water purchases, repayment of loans, house payments, car payments, their political sensitivity, their beliefs, their contacts, positions, strengths, the projects, court records, police records, driving records, insurance information, anti-establishment acquaintances. On the national level, we receive prices of commodities, sales, investments, credit information, payment information, polls, surveys, publications, telephone records, utility purchases, and the sequence needs to go like this. Allocate the opportunities, destroy the opportunities, control the economic environment, control the availability of raw materials, control the capital, control the bank rates, control the inflation of the currency, control the possession of property, control the industrial capacity, control manufacturing, control the availability of goods, the prices of commodities, the labor force, payments to government officials, control the legal functions, control the personal data file, control the advertising, control the media, control material available for TV viewing, disengage their attention from real issues, engage their emotions, create disorder, chaos, insanity, control design of more probing tax forms, control surveillance, control the storage of information, develop psychological analysis and profiles of individuals, control the legal functions, control the sociological factors, control the health options, prey on weakness, cripple strength, leech wealth and substance. So the strategies would be to keep the public ignorant in order to get less public organization, to maintain access to the control point for feedback in order to get the required reaction to things like sales and prices, create distractions to lower defenses, attack the family unit to control the education of the young, give less cash and more credit for more self-indulgence and more data, more purchase history, attack the privacy of the church to destroy faith, social conformity so that the program is more simple, minimize the tax protest in order to get maximum economic data. The primary strategy, diversion. Experience has demonstrated that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of the basic system principles on one hand, and keep them confused and disorganized and distracted with matters of no real importance on the other hand. This is achieved by disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activity, providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics and logic, systems design and economics, discouraging technical creativity, engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities by an unrelenting emotional attack by way of constant barrage of sex, violence, and wars in the media, especially the TV and the newspapers. Give them what they desire in excess. Deprive them of what they really need. Rewriting history, rewriting law, and subjecting the public to the deviant creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. The general rule is that there's profit in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. Therefore, the best approach is to create problems and then offer solutions. The job of the media is to keep the adult public attention diverted away from the real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. The school's job is to keep the young public ignorant of real math and real economics and real law and real history. The entertainment's job is to keep the public entertainment below a 6th grade level, and the purpose of work is to keep the public busy with no time to think. A silent weapons system operates upon data obtained from a docile public by legal, but not always lawful force. Much information is made available to silent weapon systems through the IRS. This information consists of the enforced delivery of well-organized data contained in federal and state tax forms, which are collected, assembled, and submitted by the slave labor provided by taxpayers and employers. The number of such forms submitted to the IRS is a useful indicator of public consent, which is an important factor in strategic decision-making. When the government is able to collect tax and seize private property without just compensation, that is an indication that the public is ripe for surrender and is consenting to enslavement and legal encroachment. So a good and easily quantified indicate of harvest time is the number of public citizens who pay income tax, despite an obvious lack of reciprocal or honest service from the government. The next step in the process of designing an economic amplifier is discovering the energy sources. The energy sources which support any primitive economic system are the supply of raw materials and the consent of the people to labor and consequently assume a certain rank, position, a level, or class in the social structure. So to provide labor at various levels in the pecking order. And in each class, in guaranteeing its own level of income, controls the class below it. And this preserves the class structure. And this provides stability and security, but also allows us to govern from the top. Now, as time goes on, communication and education improve. The lower class elements of the social labor structure become knowledgeable and envious of the good things that the upper class have. And they begin to attain a knowledge of energy systems and the ability to enforce their rise through the class structure. And this threatens the sovereignty of the elite. If this rise of the lower classes can be postponed long enough, the elite can achieve energy dominance, and labor by consent no longer will hold a position of an essential energy source. Let me say that again. So if this rise of the lower classes can be postponed long enough, the elite can achieve energy dominance, and in that case, labor by consent will no longer hold a position of an essential energy source. But until such energy dominance is absolutely established, the consent of people to labor and let others handle their affairs must be taken into consideration, since failure to do so could cause the people to interfere in the final transfer of energy sources to the control of the elite. So it is essential to recognize that at this time, public consent is still an essential key to the release of energy in the process of this economic amplification. So therefore, consent as an energy release mechanism will now be considered. The successful application of a strategy requires a careful study of inputs, outputs, the strategy connecting those inputs and outputs, the available energy sources to fuel the strategy. This is called logistics. A logistical problem is studied at the elementary level first, and then levels of greater complexity are studied as a synthesis of elementary factors. This means that a given system is analyzed, broken down into its subsystems. These in turn are analyzed, until by this process one arrives at the atom, the individual itself. And this is where the process of synthesis properly begins, at the time of the birth of the individual. From the time a person leaves his mother's womb, its every effort is directed towards building, maintaining, and withdrawing into artificial wombs various sorts of substitute protective devices or shells. The objective of these artificial wombs is to provide a stable environment for both stable and unstable activity, to provide a shelter for the evolutionary process of growth and maturity, to provide security for freedom, and to provide defensive protection for offensive activity. And this is true of both the general public and the elite. However, there's a definite difference in the way each of these classes go about solving this problem. The primary reason why the individual citizens of a country create a political structure is a subconscious wish or desire to perpetuate their own dependency relationship of childhood. Simply put, they want a human god to eliminate all risk from their life, to pat them on the head, kiss their bruises, put a chicken on their dinner table, clothe their bodies, tuck them into bed, tell them everything will be all right. This public demand is incredible and impossible, so the human god, the politician, meets incredibility with more incredibility by promising the world and then delivering nothing. So who is the bigger liar, the public or the godfather? And this public behavior is a surrender, born of fear, born of laziness and expediency, and it is the basis of the welfare state as a strategic weapon used against a disgusting public. Most people want to be able to subdue or kill other human beings which disturb their daily lives, but they don't want to have to cope with the moral and religious issues which such an overt act on their part might raise. So therefore they assign the dirty work to others, including their own children, so as to keep the blood off their hands. They rave about the humane treatment of animals and then sit down to a delicious hamburger from a whitewashed slaughterhouse down the street and out of sight. But even more hypocritical, they pay taxes to finance a professional association of hitmen, collectively called politicians, and then they complain about corruption in government. Again, most people want to be free to do the things like explore, but they're afraid to fail. And this fear of failure is manifested in irresponsibility and in delegating those personal responsibilities to others where success is uncertain or carries possible liabilities, which the person is not prepared to accept. They want authority, root word author, but they will not accept responsibility or liability, so they hire politicians to face reality for them. They hire politicians so that people can obtain security without managing it, to obtain action without thinking about it, to inflict theft or injury or death upon others without having to contemplate life or death, to avoid responsibility for their own intentions, to obtain the benefits of reality and science without exerting themselves in the discipline of facing or learning either of these things. They give the politicians the power to create and manage a war machine, to provide for the survival of the nation's womb, to prevent encroachment of anything upon the nation womb, to destroy the enemy who threatens the nation womb, and to destroy those citizens of their own country who don't conform for the sake of the stability of the nation womb. Now, politicians hold many quasi-military jobs, the lowest being the police, which are soldiers, the attorneys and CPAs next, who are spies and saboteurs, licensed, and the judges who shout orders and run the closed union military shop for whatever the market will bear. The generals are industrialists, the presidential level of commander-in-chief is shared by the international bankers, and the people know that they've created this farce and they finance it with their own taxes by consent, but they would rather knuckle under than be the hypocrite. And so thus a nation becomes divided into two very distinct parts: a docile subnation, which is the great silent majority, and a political subnation. The political subnation remains attached to the docile subnation, tolerates it, and leeches its substance until it grows strong enough to detach itself and then devour its parent. In order to make the meaningful computerized economic decisions about war, it's necessary to assign concrete values to each element of the war structure, and this process begins with a clear and candid description of the subsystems of such a structure. Now, few efforts of human behavior modification are more remarkable or more effective than that of the socio-military institution known as the draft. The primary purpose of a draft or other such institution is to instill by intimidation in the young males of a society the uncritical conviction that the government is omnipotent. He is taught that a prayer is slow to reverse what a bullet can do in an instant. Thus, a man trained in religious environment for 18 years of his life can, by this instrument of the government, be broken down, be purged of his fantasies and delusions in a matter of months. And once that conviction is instilled, all else becomes easy to instill. But even more interesting is the process by which a young man's parents, who purportedly love him, can be induced to send him off to war to his death. So we begin with a tentative definition of the draft. The draft is an institution of compulsory collective sacrifice and slavery, devised by the middle-aged and elderly for the purpose of pressing the young into doing the public dirty work. It further serves to make the youth as guilty as the elders, thus making criticism of the elders by the youth yet less likely. It's marketed and sold to the public under the label of patriotic or national service. His resistance to a perversion of a government makes it easier for a banking cartel to buy the state of New York in, say, 20 years. Such a problem leans heavily upon the observations and data of wartime espionage and many types of psychological testing, but crude mathematical models can be devised, if not to predict, at least to predetermine these events with certainty. What does not exist is by natural cooperation anyway, is thus enhanced by calculated compulsion. Human beings are machines, levers which may be grasped and turned, and there's little real difference between automating a society and automating a shoe factory. So as in other human social schemes, one form or another of intimidation is essential for the success of the draft. To secure the draft, individual brainwashing and programming of both the family unit and the peer group have to be engaged and brought under control. The father, the man of the household, must be housebroken to ensure that Junior will grow up with the right social training and attitudes, and the advertising media, etc., are engaged to see to it that the father be pussy whipped before or by the time he's married. He's taught that he either conforms to the social notch cut out for him, or his sex life will be hobbled and his tender companionship will be zero. He's made to see that women demand security more than logical, principled, or honorable behavior. The female, by the time his son must go to war, father, with jelly for a backbone, will slam a gun into Junior's hand before father will risk the censure of his peers or make a hypocrite of himself by crossing the investment he has in his own personal opinion or self-esteem. Junior goes to war or father will be embarrassed, so Junior will go to war. Mother, the female element of human society, is ruled by emotion first and logic second. And in the battle between logic and imagination, imagination always wins. Fantasy prevails, maternal instinct dominates so that the child comes first and the future comes second. A woman with a newborn baby is too starry-eyed to see a wealthy man's cannon fodder or a cheap source of slave labor. And as the transition becomes more difficult to manage, the family unit must be carefully disintegrated. State-controlled public education, state-operated childcare centers must become more common and legally enforced, so to begin the detachment of the child from the mother and the father at an earlier age. Inoculation of behavioral drugs like Ritalin can speed the transition for the child. Junior. The emotional pressure for self-preservation during the time of war, and the self-serving attitude of the common herd that have an option to avoid the battlefield, if Junior can be persuaded to go, is all of the pressure finally necessary to propel Johnny off to war. Their quiet blackmailings of him are the threats. No sacrifice, no friends, no glory, no girlfriend. And what about Junior's sister? Well, she's given all the good things of life by her father, and then she's taught to expect the same from her future husband, regardless of the price. Those who will not use their brains are no better off than those who have no brains. And so this mindless school of jellyfish, father, mother, son, daughter, become useful beasts of burden, or trainers of the same.